Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Bennis podcast and episode number 28 with Coach Andrej Lemanis. It was one of my favorite, if not the most favorite episode, just because of the flow and the synergy we had during the podcast. It was a true conversation. We talked about his background with Latvia, touched a little bit on that. We talked about culture building. It was a huge topic, communication, the expectation from assistant coaches in terms of what he expects from them personally, as well as technically on the floor, the responsibility, a culture of accountability, and just being your own self during the whole process. It was a very insightful episode. I urge everyone to listen that all the way through. I know it's a long one, but it's a very rich one. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe here at the bottom of this YouTube channel. If you're listening to audio, please, you may be listening, but you may not be a subscriber. Subscribe to this podcast. As more podcast listeners we have, as more subscribers we have, the more better guests we can bring on, and more listeners we have, the better it is. So I'm very thankful that you're here. I appreciate your loyalty, and I hope to see you and listen to you soon again. Enjoy this one, and talk to you soon. Bye. Action. We're rolling. Andrej Lemanis, welcome. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, we've had our encounters with the national teams, and after having Will on, I figured now it's a good chance to have you on as well. And to top it off, maybe you have some, because Will had a certain story to tell about his memories against Lithuania. Maybe you have a certain summer that jumps out at you from your memories with us.
Interesting. I mean, I always enjoy my time in Lithuania for sure, and just the way the game is embraced in Lithuania, and the fans, and the way they support the team, and know so much about basketball, and it's just the little things I guess you notice when you get to Lithuania about when you come to shoot around. Everything's organized. You have the towels, you have the clock is turned on, like the water's there. It's like it's as basketball should be, and that's not how it is in every country. So that's something certainly that stood out to me. But I do remember, so it was when I first took on the national team head coaching role. Part of what we did was sit down and strategize about, how do we move from being whatever we were. I think we were 13th in the world at that stage, at that time. And how do we go about trying to advance? And, of course, we needed to beat the best European teams. And in order to beat the best European teams, we needed to go play them in the leading tournaments. And that's something that perhaps we hadn't committed the time or the resource to up until that point. So we made the decision to do it, and thankfully the players committed. And I remember the first time, I'm not even sure where we were. We went and played, and we got our backsides handed to us. We'd lost by like 40 to Lithuania. In Lithuania, the crowd's going nuts. You guys are running the horn set. We couldn't find a way to defend horns. We just kicked our butts, whatever we decided to do. And it was like, okay, like this is why we're here. It was a good realization. It's like, thank goodness this happened now and not in the tournament, and we're out. And so certainly that first time playing Lithuania, just the professionalism, the crowd, but the way you just destroyed us was quite eye-opening and a memory.
So two things to that. The horn set, I assume it was either 2013, the first summer, because I think we started at the same time, me personally, and you with the national in 2013. And then we met each summer, either during the tournaments or in preparation in Lithuania or elsewhere. But the horn set was prevalent because the Lemanis brothers were always involved. And yes, whenever the Lemanis brothers were always involved, every team had their hands full, because we just let them read it. They read each other so well blindly, and then it's hard. We don't even know what's going to happen. So how does the opponent going to know what's going to happen? So that was definitely one of our strengths also in the Eurobasket in 2013. But I remember Will was talking about, I wonder if you remember the trip to Argentina where the game got rained out, and Will was talking about how we practiced on the wet floor instead of calling it quits.
Yeah. Yeah, our guys thought you were crazy.
Yeah, we did too. We as assistant coaches, we did too. We were like looking like it's time. We have to go.
Yeah, that was an interesting situation. That was certainly our NBA based guys were not going to play that game. They kept looking at me like, no, we're just not doing it. This is dangerous.
Yeah.
And then thankfully the game got called off, and then they saw you guys continuing the practice, and they were like, okay, that's not something we would do. But yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, just going back to the horn set, and that was, I mean, Kalnides was at the top of that thing, leading the show. And as you say, it was the twin brothers kicked our ass. But I think one of the learnings that we had from that, and that was why it was important to go and play those games for us, to get those learnings, was like, we couldn't let you get into the horn set. You know, that was too hard to defend. So we needed to find ways to disrupt you earlier. And that's where we started to do some of the up-court defensive stuff, and we'd double team the ball as it came over the halfway line. Just because if we let you walk up and run horns, we're in a lot of trouble. So that was one of the things that we got certainly out of those preparation games. And I'm glad that we did it. And, you know, we developed a good relationship over the years for sure. I mean, Lithuania is obviously a great basketball nation, and always had a great respect for it. And I thought, I guess I have a little bit of connection to that part of the world as well with my Latvian heritage. I always felt, you know, connected, but I think we developed a great little relationship there over the years that I was the head coach, and I really enjoyed it. And in some ways I feel grateful that you guys allowed us to have that preparation, which enabled us to sort of get that step that we were missing for so many years.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're sitting here, probably also because we've connected so well throughout the summers, as many times as we saw each other. And Lithuanians and Latvians call themselves brothers, you know. So it's definitely a brotherhood. And as methodical as your preparation for your national team journey was with the rankings and the pursuing the top positions, that's the way my podcast is as well. I'm very methodical as well. So I'll let you know what you got yourself into today. But you already touched on it. And as we talked before, I have 4 quarters. I prepare the different topics up front, you know, a little bit of background, a little bit of philosophy and communication, cultural communication in particular. In your case, is very interesting, and self-improvement part. At the end, I will throw out some ATOs at you, also with some questions from some of the followers on my social media. But you mentioned your heritage, and you're wearing a sweater that's very Latvian. How is the connection? How did the connection come along with Latvia? Where does your heritage start with Latvia, and where does that have any kind of connection with your introduction to basketball?
Yeah, so both my parents are Latvian, and they were displaced during the Second World War, ended up in displaced persons camp in Germany, and then through whatever the various processes were, ended up on a boat to Australia. And so they both came out as teenagers into Australia and started their lives there, again in displaced persons camps in Australia. And at that time, Australia was marvelous the way that they treated, I guess, the refugees coming in. And there's a system of we will, you know, let you into the country, we'll grant you, we'll look after you, we'll give you a job for 2 years, but you have to go where we tell you to go and where we need the help. Australia was obviously still a very young country at that point and looking to grow its population as well. So that's how they started their life here. And again, it's when you talk to my parents about, you know, the struggles that they had and the going through the war situation, and you know, not knowing where your next meal's coming from, and then the uncertainty of where you're going to live, it's pretty amazing to, you know, get to my stage in life where everything's provided for, and you know, you got complete safety, and your meals are like you're never going hungry, and you get the opportunity to become a basketball coach. So I'm very thankful for you know, what they've been able to provide me. And yeah, dad got me into basketball. Dad got me into basketball again in Australia. Basketball was not a particularly popular sport, even when I was young, but certainly when my parents got here. I think the first time Australia played in the Olympics was 1956, which was the Melbourne Olympics. And obviously they got entry there because of the host nation status. But in terms of basketball within Australia, as I understand the history, the Latvian population, particularly within Melbourne and Adelaide, played the significant role in, firstly, the establishment of basketball within the Australian landscape, and then the growth of basketball. And there's a famous stadium which no longer exists in Melbourne, but it's called the Albert Park Stadium, which is sort of the home of basketball in Melbourne. And the great Lindsay Gaze ran that stadium and had a house there. And my father tells the story proudly of how he, the opening night of Albert Park Stadium, he played there. So certainly he brought the interest, and he got me involved. He was coaching my brother in an under 10s team. I was 6 years old and they needed some players. They were short for players, and he threw me in so that they could start the game, and that's kind of where it started. So yeah, I've been involved since I was 6 years old.
Was your father playing in Latvia already?
No, not that I'm aware of. Again, he came out to Australia as a 13 or 14-year-old, and I'm not exactly sure. I think during the war and stuff, they spent a lot of time, obviously just surviving.
Doing something for sure. But they met when they arrived to Australia.
They met in Australia. Yes, met in Melbourne.
At any point now during your career, if we fast forward a little bit, was there any kind of projection of coaching the Latvian national team? Was that a real thing at any point? Was there interest? Was there some sort of communication?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's been communication. Obviously, they're aware of my Latvian heritage, and I have a special connection to that part of the world. So, if the opportunity was ever right for both parties, for sure, I'd be interested in that. And I think they've expressed a similar thing, just to stay in touch. And if it came up and the time was right, and they were happy and it made sense for me and all those sorts of things, we're both parties would be certainly open to trying to get that happening.
That's like talking about career, because it's also a future, and I have also couple thoughts about that, about building a career. But how was your approach to your career? Because you had the New Zealand Breakers, then you coached the Boomers, obviously, then you went to Japan, where you are right now, or not right now at this moment, but where you're coaching at this point of your career. Was there a methodical, again, we're back to methodical podcast, methodical approach to your career, or did you let it happen as it came along, and then that's the way the cookie crumbled, basically?
Part two of that. It wasn't planned really at all. It was opportunities as they arose, and even just to fall into coaching, it's not something that I had planned to do. My playing career, I was end of the bench kind of guy in our top division in Australia, the NBL, and I got to a point where, at that point in time, Australian basketball, some players were fully professional, not all. I was one of the ones who wasn't fully professional. I had to work to survive. And I got to a point where I couldn't get another contract in a Melbourne-based team. I would have had to move to another city for, at that stage with $10,000, and I had to give up a good job to move, and I had to kind of make a decision. And I was on a team that was coached by Brian Gorgian, who's the current national coach of Australia. And he said to me at that point, and I think I was only 26 or 27, he's like, I think you'd make a good coach. If you want to go down that path, I'll help you. And it was a key moment for me. And whilst I was still young and, wanted to play, it was like, well, if I'm going to make a living out of this sport, it's obviously not as a player. So maybe this coaching thing's, worthwhile giving a go. And I guess I stopped playing early to start the coaching career. And again, not with any particular goals or path or plan in place. It's like, yep, okay, let's try this and see how it goes. And I found that I enjoyed it. And I think, like every young coach, you sort of have to, you experience your challenging times and your moments. And, there's times when I was, so I ended up giving up my job to become a full-time coach and, signed my first 3-year deal in the league, and things are going, here we go. I'm a professional full-time coach. I've taken a pay cut from my day job to be a basketball coach. Signed 3-year deal, and after the first year, the owner sells a license back to the league, pulls me into his office, gives me a check for a month, and says, see you later, good luck.
Game over.
Game over. And now I'm scrambling again, and ended up in a second division team somewhere as an assistant, working the bar at nights just to try to continue to make ends meet and survive in basketball. So as every young coach, you have your challenges, and then just got, again, fortunate with some opportunities that came up, and had a coach offered me a job as an assistant up in Townsville, and that was sort of the one that got me going again in the professional leagues, and sort of things played out from there, and just applied for jobs as they came available, and just kind of lucky from there. And just on that, I actually had an interesting, and again, I think obviously everyone has different goals and objectives and does things different ways. And some people like to plan, and I want to go and do this and that. And I think that's good. But I used to visit with Brett Brown when he was at the San Antonio Spurs for many years. And, as you do as a young coach, you're there and you kind of got a little bit of a taste because you get on the inner sanctum. And I was, talking to him once about, how do you get into the NBA, and do you think I can, and this and that. And he looked at me and he said, the best job, it's the one you got. He's like, just do that really well. Be damn good at the job that you have, and things will play out for you. And it was, for me, a really good piece of advice. And I've sort of stuck to that ever since. And things they've kind of worked out for me since then. You just got lost in being great, as good as I can at the job that I have. And then it's the other opportunities sort of have found me. I haven't gone seeking them.
Focus on the thing at hand. Focus on on what you're doing right now, and the things will turn out the way they're supposed to turn out, and people will notice. I mean, I think it's very, a lot of people get caught up with making too many future plans of where you want to be in 5 years, too methodical in a sense. And I get that question a lot of times, where, what's your 5-year plan? What do you see yourself in 5 years? And I just heard it today on the podcast, and I made up a quote, my own quote to this. So, like the movie with Kevin Costner, Dancing with the Wolves.
Yeah.
I bet that's the first time there's a basketball reference with Dancing with the Wolves. but I would like to be dancing with basketball, like dancing with life, dancing with basketball along. And the way that the things break for me, or they don't break, that's the way I want to approach it. That's the way I want to take how they come. And I don't like to put myself in the box of how things should be in 5 years, because first of all, you set yourself up for disappointment. And second of all, you become too uptight with achieving that goal. And there's too many factors that are out of your control. So that's it. You just have to control what you can control right now in that moment with the job at hand. Like you said, like Brett Brown gave you that perfect advice. And then I think people will notice, you will feel also more focusing on the thing at hand, and taking away the distractions of goal setting. That's
it's something we tell our players all the time, right? In the games.
Yeah.
It's like, control what you control, be great in the moment. Don't worry about what's happened or what's going to happen in 2 plays time. Be great in this play.
Yeah.
So it's a similar sort of concept, I think.
and move on to the next play. Move on to the next play quick enough to forget what happened, if it was bad or good or whatever. Just next play. Yeah. It's a weird life that we're living. I feel like it's the coaching career and the approach to it. You have to be very flexible, very realistic. And I feel like you have a very realistic approach to your career of like moving, but it's something that not everybody's made out for, in terms of like being this flexible and having the world open to us. Like other regular life or regular jobs, they're so enshrined into their own community, and they're staying where they're at, and we're open to the whole world. Like you said, like the compared to where your parents grew up and where we're growing up, everything is just wide open. And I think it feels like it takes a different mentality to go that route. Not everybody is cut out for that, and you have to be really flexible and adaptable, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's you're right, it's hard. And it takes a mindset from you doing it, but it takes this really special personal people to do it with you, right? So, if you're going to be married or if you're going to have kids, and I think that's maybe sort of the bigger choice there is, am I going to do what I want and follow my sort of career wherever that takes me? I need to be flexible enough to do it, or am I, going to settle down with a family and in many ways sort of make choices that are best for them? Like, the kids moving around all over the place and always being disrupted. I see that all the time as a choice that coaches have to make. They have an opportunity, but can I really, now the kids have started school and they're just happy. And the last time we moved, they got upset and, can I do it again? And now we're going to a foreign country that speaks a foreign language. Like, how's that going to work? And now my wife, she's just got herself a decent job, but just got settled. How's she going to be? Like, you just disrupting so many lives. If you have a family, I think that's a difficult choice. And it's actually just happened here in Australia. Like, there's a Canadian coach who was coaching the Perth Wildcats, Scott Morrison. And, he's just announced in the last week that he's going back to Canada just, because of his family situation, and his kids got disrupted here and they needed some help. And so he's gone back to Canada where he can get a bit more help, and it's, I think that's the thing. Often for us as individuals, it's maybe an easy choice or easier choice or easier to do. It's those around us that we impact.
Yeah, there's a fine line between selfishness and upside for the career, for security, for the whole family, right? Like you're doing it for the family, you're doing it for the good of the family, for the security in your future, but you're also doing it for your career's sake to a degree where you're trying to build and you're trying to achieve something and build something, but also at the same time, like you said, it takes a special person on your side to be accepting and to be also, be able to not negotiate, it's not the right word probably, but sacrifice and find this equilibrium between both parties to have the like a realistic approach to the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a tough thing to find. I think as sad as it is, realities are a lot of coaches are divorced,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
tough life on both parties,
Absolutely. And third party is the kids, obviously. So it's definitely lots of stories for sure. There's a crazy statistic in the NBA that I've recently heard. I just can't remember the exact percentages, but I think it's over half of coaches that have this extremely hard career that end up divorcing, but I don't know the exact number. You ready to move on to philosophy?
Sure.
Let's get philosophical.
Okay.
And Will mentioned that as well, because of your style of coaching and the way you approach the team. I wanted to talk about egoless coaching, putting your ego aside as a coach and not to be overbearing, overbracing, and letting the players be. How do you approach, and how do you feel that you can be still your authentic and your own self while coaching without being stepped on? Because I think that's the biggest fear, I think, of young coaches, especially, where you have to put your ego aside and not to be a control freak. And you're trying to project the nice side of you, right? So it kind of gets responded back to you, and it's kind of a give and take, but it's like one bad apple can ruin the whole deal. So I'm wondering how you implement this egoless coaching, and how do you deal when players are trying to test you and overstep the line? Because there's certainly without mentioning names, I don't like to mention names on my podcast, but when there's players that approach and try to step the line, how do you deal with that?
How long do we have on the podcast? This is a lifelong journey with lots of learnings and mistakes along the way, and continual learning. And it's maybe I'll jump forward to one of the things in the third or fourth quarter, which is about continual questions you ask yourself, or growth, or whatever. And the thing that I keep saying now is, the player, like, I keep getting older, but the players keep staying the same age. So, how do I continue to keep that, relationship with them? And am I still relevant? But in terms of building, so, again, this is a long answer. So if you get bored or think your listeners are going to get bored, please interject and put me in a different direction. But so again, in terms of my journey, I started my first professional head coaching job, and as is normally the case when you get a head coaching opportunity, you take over a team that's struggling. It's rare that the team that wins the championships fires the coach and brings in someone as a first-year head coach, right? And so you're going to take a team that's struggling. I walked into a tough situation, and we were bad. And in my first year, we were on a 10-game losing streak. Thankfully, I had a good owner. Most owners would have fired me. And of course, in that, you're getting young coach, you're getting lots of advice, and everybody's giving you stuff. And again, I played for Brian Gorgian, and he's a pretty demanding coach, and he's the most winningest coach in the Australian league. And people were always, oh, Brian would do it like this, and Brian would do it like that. And then I started trying to be harder, and I'd yell at people, and I found over time, like in the reviews at the end of the year, that the players. The feedback that I got from the players was that they weren't happy. They didn't like the way I was coming across, and the relationship just wasn't there. And as I thought about myself, it's like, it's not who I am. That's not me. I'm false when I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to be somebody I'm not. And so my first bit of advice is, like, regardless of what I say, what anybody else says, you have to be yourself. Like, your personality is your personality. If you are a screamer and yeller, be a screamer and yeller. If you're not a screamer and yeller, don't be a screamer and yeller. Like, obviously somewhere in there you find the bits, you got to mold a little bit this way, a little bit that way, depending on the situation, the personnel, but be who you are, because the players players know when you're genuine, and when you're like, they sense when you're faking stuff, and that's when they take advantage or you lose the trust. That's the biggest thing, I think, the trust, if you're not who you are. Then again, through my journey over time, and there's the sport over here, AFL football, which is a very big sport in Australia, and they've gone down for many years now, this whole idea of like this team values and team building. And my assistant coach had a connection there, and we started down that path. And to this point, we'd often had people come in from business about, you have to think like this and you have to think like that, and there's above the line thinking and below the line thinking and all those sorts of things. And none of it had really resonated with me, because there's always somebody telling us how it should be. You have to do it like this. And I was like, well, why do we have to do it like that? Like, why is that going to work for us? And then we got a guy in from the AFL, that we call it team building side of the game. And I guess the penny drop moment for me was when he went around the room. He's like, how many games of experience do you have? And someone, oh, I've had 50 games, and I've had 200 games. And at that stage, we had a player on that team who played the most ever games in the Australian NBL. Like, Tony Rollinson, he played like 620 games. And so he finishes all that, and he's like, okay, so there's like, okay, sorry, I missed a bit. At the start of that, there was a question from one of our players, like, because, he opens up, he gives his spiel, and he says, has anyone got any questions? The player puts his hand up and says, yeah, why are you here? You got leading teams on your shirt. Are you here to help us pick a captain, or what? What's the day about? And then he goes around, asks the game's experience, and he said, okay, so there's like 2,500 games of experience in this room, and you guys want me to tell you how to run your team? No wonder you guys can't win anything. And for me, that was the penny drop moment, to say, okay, this guy's different. Like, there's something here that's different. And that's where sort of we start to establish the whole process of player-driven team values. And so then, we go through a process of discussing as a team, what do we stand for? How do we want to be seen? What values do we want to expose? What do we all commit to? And because the players have been part of the process, what it then gives you is a framework that you can sort of keep coming back to and utilize to say, well, as a team, and you were part of this discussion, as a team, we said that, we wanted to move the ball, and so just going back to what we agreed to as a group, I'm not saying you're a bad person, Bernis, for taking that shot. I'm not saying you're a bad guy, but as a team, we agreed that that's not the best way for us to play. So you just can keep coming back. You can hold people to account in a different way to the values of the group. And I find that very powerful. And so I guess I've really grown down that path over time. And the it's when I present it, there's often the question is, does it feel like the inmates are running the asylum, right? That's often the question that I get. And my answer is, I actually feel that I have a lot more control by giving up control. And there's winning, there's by empowering the players to communicate, to take ownership, things get taken care of. Like, it doesn't always have to be the head coach taking care of things. And, there's classic examples of teams that won a championship, and, you're sitting around afterwards having a drink, and some stories start to come out of stuff that I didn't even know. But, someone on the team, or the captain took care of it, or someone else took care of it, or an assistant coach took care of it before it got to be a problem. And so I actually feel like I've got a lot more control by giving up control to the group.
not micromanaging. I mean, there's a lot of points now. I was taking notes as we were talking, and that reminds me of several things. So Ituda said something also where you have to at some point trust the orchestra. Like you let them do, and you are kind of the director of the whole spiel. But you have to give up the control to trust them, and then you have to bring them up to that point where you can trust them. But the accountability factor also tells me, that when you are projecting one single truth on the team, and just only one way of doing it, it will never. It's hardly ever going to work out the way you envision your truth to be. So every team has their own sort of truth, and you reversed it, and by letting the team define the truth that makes them the best possible team they can be. Because each season or each national team, you'd exchange one or two players, it's already a different deal. Like you change the locker room, basically you change a little bit of the style, maybe a situation has to change, because every player, every personality is different. So every team has a different truth, I believe. And by being flexible, and that's the fascinating thing to me about basketball, that this ability to read and to be flexible and to adjust on the fly, and to see this team needs this, and next year the team needs something else, or maybe 2 months later the team needs something else right now. And that by allowing the team to speak up and to take responsibility on certain topics, on certain situations, it makes your job easier, but also it creates trust between both parties.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a really good way to summarize it or describe it. And if you're trying to put your truth onto the group, that's what I found is, when things go bad, it's easy for everyone just to wash their hands and say, well, this is what you said would work, and this is your way, and I told you it wouldn't work, and so this is all your fault. Whereas if you engage everybody from the start, there's a greater ownership from everybody. It's like so a micro example of that would be, you're doing a scouting situation, and there's a pin down situation, and you say, okay, we're going to do it like this, and one of the players steps up and says, oh, hang on, I think we should defend it, like we should go over instead of under. My thing normally in that situation is say, you want to do it like that, good, do it, because now they have a responsibility to make that work. Yeah, suddenly they're going to show you that they were right. And I
exactly
think, that's a good place to be. But what you need to do is create that environment, and it just doesn't happen. Like, you need to create the environment of trust, and you need to create that environment where players are prepared to step up and say some things. But there is that, there's the line, right? I say all this, and I've had it before. So I had a young coach come and visit with me back in my New Zealand Breaker days. He just got a head coaching job in the second league down, and he came and spent a couple of weeks with us, and we did it. Was really interested in this space and the player empowerment and those sorts of things. And he went away and had all his notes, and he came back the next year to visit. And I said, how'd you go? He said, well, it was interesting because I started down that path And then after a while, like, because I was always asking the players on their opinion and stuff, that the players thought I didn't know what I was doing. Like I didn't know the answer. So I kept asking the players what the answer was. So, there's still obviously that piece of you giving them the confidence that you're, as you said before, as the conductor, you have the plan, you're asking for their assistance within the broader plan, but you kind of, what you're doing.
Yeah. And to get back on that, like, you have to be yourself. I think, like, it's, as you said, like the players see through that, see through a facade that you're trying to put on if you're not trying to be yourself. And I think it's a great point that you're making, that you when you realize after reflecting that, it was not you. And the coach that you're talking about, he was probably doing it too much of, being doing what he saw you do, or what he was trying, and not really playing reading the situation at hand, and realizing that the players are probably needing a little bit more of a direction at some point, or a little bit more of a strict system, and then you let them within that system make a decision, and they're more engaged in that decision because it was their decision, their final decision. My father was doing that when we were coaching in the second division in Germany, and he's considered a player coach, but we were successful because he also had the respect of being a former player, but also because we had guidelines of how to play, what to play. And then in certain situations, it's like, because there was some tricky situations of how you want to guard a certain player in a certain situation, and then you have to decide, like, do we gonna go over, do we go under, top lock, or whatever. And then the players are, you can see that the players are kind of like, they feel how they feel on the floor when they guard. They know better of how they feel to fight around the screen, or to see if it's going to be, with this situation, feasible or not. It's realistic. A lot of coaches may be too theoretical, and then you have to listen of the players and their feel for the situation themselves, if they have that experience of like, this may not work. So then they're more dialed in.
Yeah. For sure. And if the angle of the screen is different in this particular situation, all that, like, the game's dynamic. But for me, it comes down to, at the end of the day, if you can build an environment of trust, that's for me the key thing, is where there's trust within the group, that we can have a free exchange of ideas, that people aren't going to take offense. I'm always saying this because I care ultimately for what's best for the group. I'm telling you this because I care about you, and I want you to do well. So, because when you do well, the group does well. Those sorts of situations. And if you don't spend time on that, I mean, you're never gonna build that trust. And so I think, certainly it takes time, it takes effort. It doesn't always, it's not always smooth either. It doesn't always work. I'm sitting here sounding like, it's easy, but it's not. And there's still people that don't get it. I mean, because, teams and individuals, of course, there's players that are worried about their family and their next job and their next contract, and they need they believe they need certain outcomes in order to look after themselves. And how does that fit within the team dynamic? But at the end of the day, for coaching, for me, it comes down to relationships. And the better you can build your relationships, then the more, like, as a coach, all you can do is influence, right? You can't play. You're not out there playing. All you can do is influence. If you don't have the relationships, if the player doesn't trust you, you can't influence, or your ability to influence is reduced. And so you need to build that environment. And if you can get to a point where a player truly believes and truly trusts that what you want is for him to succeed and to do well, then you have a chance to influence, in my opinion.
The intent is always good. Like, the intent is for the good of the player, for the good of the team, and for their future. But like you said, like it starts with the head coach. He has to show that he's also taking responsibility for his own actions. Will was talking about that, where how to build a trusting environment, right? Like we're talking right now. It's probably by being first to admit to your own flaws, to your own mistakes. When you draw up an ATO that was bad, or like there's something that you have to show the players, like you have to be secure with your own the own mistake that you did, and tell them like, that was me, and please, like that's on me. Like don't worry about it.
We're all human. We all make mistakes.
Exactly. Like
we're not. You make mistakes. I make mistakes too. And we're not for sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that again with the national team, and Luke, you get your piece of growth from everywhere, right? And Luke Longley was an assistant for me on the national team, and he's a wonderful person, and he's invested a lot in me over time. And he really gets this space well. The connection space and the being able to build a relationship with people and get them to trust and to understand that you value them. And one of the things with the national team in the early days, like Luke's a big guy in the surf and paddleboarding, and I'm not a great guy in the water and all that. And he kept wanting to get us on the paddle boards and as a team and all that. And he's like, Dre, it's good for you to be vulnerable in front of the players, for you to, to fall over and fall off and look out of your depth and all that. So he said, that's a good thing, to expose yourself like that in front of the players. And that was an interesting sort of thing for him to say. And just what you said there, like just this year with my Japanese team, we had that exact situation. We came flying back in a game, came back from 20 down, fourth quarter, the ball game's on the line with, they score, we get the timeout, we advance, we're like 2 down with 8 seconds to play. I run a just terrible side out of bounds play, ATO, just terrible. We turn it over. And, in the video session on the Monday morning, I was like, fellas, that's me. Like this is me, like for sure. There's a terrible play for the personnel that we had, bad choice. And then and I think they were a little surprised by that. But then you go into the video, all right, so, pick and roll defense, you need to be over here. I made my mistakes, you made your mistakes, let's all get better.
Yeah, I love that. That's totally, we're going to talk about Japan a little bit more. But to me, like, this is such the style of communication, style of interchanging your own thoughts, your own, like you said, being vulnerable, not afraid to show that. You just have to be, at some point, I mean, like your capabilities, you can't be doing the same mistake over and over. I mean, I think that's self-understood. But at some point, coaches make mistakes as well, and I think that's a huge part of a coach's career. But talking about, let's talk about a little bit about the Boomers, and because of the system that you've built throughout the years when you started, and I was fortunate enough to start at the same time and watch the progression, where I saw the team grow throughout the years. Like you said early on, when you guys came over, like we had the upper hand, but I could see like the way you were setting up the system, centered around Petty and centered around the players that you had. It was getting more difficult to guard each summer, just because of how natural and how read and react fluent the system ended up being, where you basically had counters to everything. And I was wondering how the progression was of implementing the roles and implementing the system over the course of each summer. And was the system based on the roster, or was the roster based on the system that you wanted to implement? Like which direction did you end up, or like your thoughts and your philosophy implementation with the Boomers?
Yeah, that's another question that I could answer take 2 hours to answer. So let me get that last bit first, because that's I think a question that happens a lot, right? Is, do you recruit to your philosophy or of how you want to play, or do you fit your philosophy around what you have? And I think the answer is always both, right? So national team, I think it's definitely like the best players are the best players. They're going to make the team. Like, Paddy Mills is going to make the team. Andrew Bogut is going to make the team. So in those situations, it is this is what we have. So how do we make that work? Let's put in something that gets the best out of the talent that we have. I think in a club team, it sometimes starts the other way. Like you have again, you are who you are as a coach, and you know what you like and how you like to play, and you try to recruit to that system, but you don't get every piece that you want. Like nobody ever does, unless you got the biggest budget in the league. You don't get everybody that you want, and so all the pieces exactly as you want them to fit. And so once you have your team, then that needs to flip to go, all right, these are the pieces that we have. So now how do we make these bits all fit together? So for me, it's always a combination of both. In terms of the growth of the Boomers, and the stuff that we've been talking about just around the building a team, I think for me that's building the culture of a team. That's where it started with me. So in 2013, when I took over as the head coach, so I was fortunate to coach under Brett Brown from 2009 2012. I was assistant coach, and I think Brett did an amazing job of starting to bring us into the the professionalism side of it, so to speak. He challenged Basketball Australia around how we support the team, and bring in video analysis and all those sorts of other bits, and looking after the players to give them an opportunity to concentrate on playing, so they're not having to wash their own uniforms and things like that. So a great job of just dragging the program up. And then when I took over in 2013, the space where I first put my effort is into developing this culture piece. And so the first thing we did was we got in all the main guys, and at that stage too, that with young players, Dante Exum, Ben Simmons, that we saw as the future of the Boomers. We got them all just into a camp in Canberra. We didn't do any basketball. Came in and we just sat down 2-3 days with a facilitator in the room about who do we want to be as a team, how are we going to play, what do we stand for, all these things that we've just been speaking about. But also we spoke to, all right, so if we want to win at that stage we spoke about, we just want to win a medal. What does that take? And it was about, and I was coming from the place of, well, one, we need commitment, because at that stage, Australia, to qualify, we had to beat New Zealand. And most of the time, the NBA guys didn't come back. We did it with the NBL guys, and then we'd see the NBA guys every second year. The World Championships, they'd rock up, and then the Olympics, they'd rock up. And we went through, and statistically, the European teams that were winning these medals at World Championships and Olympics, they were together every single year. And so they're building, and we just see each other every second year. That doesn't work. And then to win the medals, we've got to beat the best European teams. That takes a commitment of time. This is the off season for all the NBA guys. We understand that. We appreciate that you come in and give up your time, but if we're serious about winning, we need to be the European teams aren't coming to us. We're on the other side of the world. So we need to be prepared. Again, for you guys to give up time with your families and to go and to sit in Europe for 3 weeks before a tournament and go there and play all the leading games and do all our preparation in Europe before we go into a major tournament. And that's where it started. And, I remember clearly that in 2013, where all the players sat there, and at that stage as well, it's not only for the World Cup and the Olympics, it's when we play New Zealand in the qualifying. I need you guys to turn up as well. And they all looked at each other, the main guys, and said, I'm in, are you in, are you in, are you in? And they all committed at that point to, yes, we want to do this. And that for me was a significant point, because whenever, as time goes on and someone's a bit tired and a bit injured and it's okay, but you guys said to win a medal, this is what we needed to do. And it's yep, that's right. I'm coming, I'm in. And so I think that was a significant part of that. And that enabled us to get that growth. We took, again, we go play you guys, I think, whatever it was in 2013, Lithuania, the first time, you just absolutely hammer us. And I'm sitting there going, goodness me, we're a long way from these guys, and how the hell are we going to go horns? But those learnings and that continual, that time just spent together and away in Europe, and just, so we could, we also put in, calling the team culture guy, he came with us and we did sessions around that, how we continue to build as a team and what do we stand for and what are our learnings, but also with that, the offensive and defensive philosophies. And ultimately, I run that flow offense, and in its purest form, it just has basically guidelines, so, but it comes down to read, react, and that's just the time spent together. And again, the players, I think all of that fits together, because they trusted each other, they trusted the system, they started to understand that the flexibility within sort of the offense was actually an advantage, because it didn't matter what teams did defensively, and it was hard to scout and all those sorts of things. And then you put them in environment and let them be good basketball players, and that that sort of, thankfully evolved over time to being a pretty good group.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest advantage of a flow offense, like you did, like you ran throughout the years, throughout the summers. And like, first of all, like you said, the first point is that everybody was there most of the time. So you naturally, for a flow offense, you need to know each other on and off the court, and then that translates on the court as well. The chemistry is translatable. But so you didn't, per se, with the flow offense, you didn't really care of how other teams, what kind of pick and roll defense they play, what kind of defenses they had. You ran your stuff, and depending on how they guarded, you had counters for basically every situation that the defense was throwing at you.
Yeah. Yes, and not necessarily like scripted down with a video session, this is the counter, or at practice, this is the counter. Like, that evolves over time just by playing the games. And situation happens, and then you go, okay, so this, you play a leading game and someone does blow you up with something, you go, okay, so what are we going to do here? And sometimes the coaches come with an answer, sometimes the players have an answer. And when you talk about, we didn't care how we were defended, like, ultimately we didn't care because, well, one, we can't control how you're going to defend us, right? That's your choice, it's not our choice. We can't dictate to you. Of course, going in the games, you're scouting, saying, well, they show them pick and rolls, or they drop some pick and roll coverage, or, and they turn the top block, these sorts of situations, whatever it is. But that's just a guide. Like, if it goes in the game, it's different. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We don't get stressed by it. It's like, okay, that's cool. Like, suddenly now they're out blitz and pick and rolls, no problems. We've got an answer for that, or we feel we have an answer for that.
But that's the thing. That's the thing I love about the flow offenses, because and I keep, on every other podcast, I keep saying that with and I don't mean to brag or whatever, but it's the fact that when Quinn Snyder was in Moscow with us, we had this flow transition offense that we ran, and it was lots of, because we had very high IQ players that were able to do that, were able to read and react, and we had like a front side and a back side and a transition, and you'd run different counters to every defense you encounter. If they denied, you go through the big and yada yada yada. So I feel like that's the biggest advantage, where in Europe you have too much rigid offenses where it's this way and no other way, and you have to absolutely make the defense or you just have to how you call it, I forgot the English word, where you have to just basically put your offense on top of their defense, no matter how they defend it, and that doesn't work all the time. And just really, you really just stagnate, and you stop ball movement, and you get out of rhythm. So I prefer flow over rigid all the time, and especially during the season, you have all the time in the world. Most of the time, you have more time to implement it and to keep running it, instead of a national team where you basically hope that everybody comes from window to window. But you had a full-time culture guy. Is that something that I misunderstood?
So when we got together with the windows, when we got together as a group, we started to engage the guy full-time to come with us. Like, he wasn't 12 months of the year, but he traveled with us. Certainly before we went into Rio, he came with us to Brazil and to Argentina in the lead-ups. He can't get in the Olympic Village, so he didn't hang around for the Olympics. But yes, we engaged him. Interesting.
I would love to talk to him one day. And that would be a really interesting factor, because that's a lot of culture is people take it for granted. Like, chemistry is supposed to happen out like naturally, but that's I think wishful thinking. I think having somebody who's an expert in culture building and having implement that with actions and with certain, like, again, methodically, it's probably much more effective.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like everything, right? If you spend time on it, you got a chance to make it work. If you how many times do you do pick and roll coverage at practice? Every day.
Yeah.
But culture, we talk about it once at the start. We spend 15 minutes on it at the start of the season, and then here we go. Like, really? Like, you expect somehow that's going to magically work. So if you don't spend time on it, like, you can't really expect it to be effective, in my opinion. And so yeah, he's good. And so my point there is they invested time in it. And again, I've seen him being most effective, I guess, if he's with you and he's with the team, and then, he's off having a cup of coffee with someone and talking to something, a player about this, or I saw you at practice, you got a little frustrated. What was that about? How would you, how can we make that into a positive, or how can we change that, or what would you do? Should you go talk to him? Like, just those conversations around the edges, I think, are really useful. And even, just maybe just a little tip here, something that's a good starter, and something that we did in Japan here, because the language barrier and stuff, and I don't have a guy, but just at the start was so you get people to sit around, they share experiences, and you put them in groups, and then it's just a simple question like, so the best teams you've been involved with, like, what are the sorts of things that happen in the best teams? And then the worst teams you've been involved in, like, what experiences have you had? Why do you think those teams are bad? And of course, the best teams are, we got along, and the players, spent time together, and everyone was unselfish. And the worst teams, there was bitching in the locker room. Everybody was unhappy. Everyone played for themselves. Like, all those sorts of things start to come out. And so it's all right. So we list these up on the board, and it's as simple as, well, if you don't know what to do more of this and do less of that. Let's start there.
That's fair. But he's not a team psychologist. He's literally like he's a culture expert on building a team culture.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how you can call somebody an expert these days. Like, he doesn't have a degree in it. He's just gone down this path and found that it's been successful for him. And I know he still works with Melbourne United.
Love it. I love it.
There's an industry in it, certainly within Australia. There's lots of different people, and I've different people. I've had different facilitators at different times, and like everything, some are more impactful than others. But the one that we used with the Boomers guy's name is Trent Houghton. He's, for me, the best I've ever seen in this space.
Well, Trent, you will be contacted.
I can give you his number.
Perfect. So moving on to the third quarter, I love these topics. As you see, I really like to dig a little bit on certain things that you mentioned. Moving on to the communication part, which is more, in your case, it's cultural communication, and coaching New Zealand Breakers, and very successfully so. Then also coaching the Boomers, and successfully so, and in Brisbane, and now in Japan. There's 3 different countries that you've been in, and to me, the commonality I see between those 3 countries is there's very peaceful countries, in a sense, where this is just it's a very peaceful environment. Is probably like just too simply said. But can you differentiate between the 3 cultures of how to coach, or how you, besides being yourself and being you, but was there certain nuances to each culture that you can remember and that you had to kind of adjust to while you were there?
For sure. Every country is different, and people are different, and cultures are different, and it's important, I think, that you respect those. And again, actually, one of the learnings I took from just observing the Europeans was when I was with the Boomers, and going around and getting my butt kicked by Lithuania, and going and watching Eurobaskets. The national teams often seem to have like just an older guy hanging around who'd just be at the end of the bench. And then after the game, you sort of be in the hallways, and you see him just talking with the coaching staff. And after a while, I started to figure out that often there was a former coach that was someone who's been through it before. And so I actually engaged a guy by the name of Adrian Hurley, who'd been a successful national team coach with Australia. 1996 and 2000, they led the Australian team to 4th place finishes. And so I took on this idea, and I engaged with Adrian. We've kept a relationship ever since. And when I took on the job in Japan, he and I spoke, about, I'm going to go and, get new experiences, and, try to learn from them, and have get a different perspective on basketball and life. And he said to me, I'm very happy to hear that I think it's important that you don't go and try to put your style onto them, take their style and just try to add your little pieces to it, which I thought was, again, very, very good advice. So that was certainly part of my growth and learning in New Zealand. I think going down, finding this whole cultural space and team values, and allowing the players to have control and input onto who we are as a team, and shape us shape our identity, I guess. That for me enabled me to get a better understanding of the New Zealanders and how they think and what makes them special. And there is a real special cultural connection within New Zealand. There's an identity there that is hard to understand unless you're from New Zealand. And they play far above their individual talent level when they play as a group and for each other. Like there's a special chemistry that comes out if you allow it to, and there's and you start to learn about some of those little cultural things and a little couple of cultural words that just mean something to New Zealanders, and then the importance of the haka and how you can use that emotionally. And so that was a real learning experience for me when I guess I started to give of myself into their culture rather than trying to force the Australian way onto them. It's like, no, this is, this works for them. This is good. We've got a team made up mostly of New Zealanders. So let's, and that actually differentiates us from the Australians. We're playing in an Australian league full of Australians, and now we can actually get a little point of difference here.
Be different. Yeah.
So that was good early learning for me. Obviously the Australian thing was, I've born and grown up in Australia, and I spent my time in the Australian basketball system. So I guess I'm pretty ingrained in that culture anyway. But just with the Boomers, I guess what started to really come to light again, just through the ability to, through having the conversation and providing that environment, we're having conversations about what it means to each of us to be part of the Boomers. It just started to come out like what it meant for everybody in that room. And it's like, because they're also passionate about Australian basketball, and we hadn't achieved anything. We hadn't won a medal, and until we got to that medal point, it was always going to be, we haven't quite truly represented what we're doing in Australian basketball on the world stage. We haven't really shown that to the Australian people. And there was a real drive and desire to do that. And actually something I missed before when we're talking about the team, and after one of our, I think after we qualified for the 2016 Olympics, and we came back, and the next day, again, instead of everybody just disappearing after the final game, we said, no, we need one more day to come back and debrief and all that. And the culture guy, Trent, came in, and we still did a few things together over an hour or so, round table stuff. And we had a key moment there where, again, we spoke about, winning the medal. And actually, I remember Paddy Mills stepping up, and when we give him feedback to each other, and he said, no, fellas, I want to stop talking about winning the medal. I want to talk about winning the gold medal. Like, that's what we're going there for. We're going to win the gold medal. And it was for a team that had never won the medal, it was a sort of I think there was a moment there of everybody, is that realistic? But then it was it flipped over to, hell yeah, like, let's go do that. And what that did was it drove like behaviors for the next 12 months. And, there's certainly stories around the guys in the NBA during their All-Star break, rather than taking holidays, like the Australian guys all got together during the All-Star break, and they spent their holiday together. Like, they just, again, because we want to win a gold medal, we need to go do this, and so it just really drove behaviors. And so, yeah, just around the national team, I could feel that passion. I guess for me, it was easy to connect with that, because that's kind of, that's in my blood anyway. And now in Japan, again, it's been another complete learning experience, and it's been a great experience. Again, just different culturally, and interesting there, the mix of how the imports work with the Japanese and the language barrier. And one of the reasons I wanted to take on the role in Japan is because I feel part of my success as a coach is the ability to communicate and get people to trust me and build those relationships that I talk to. I think if anything comes out of this podcast, it should be that I'm a relationships-based coach. I want to get the trust of the players, and I want them to feel that I truly want what's best for them. And that's how, I sort of connect with them and try to get the best out of them. And I was like, can that work in a foreign language? Because so much of communication is tone, expression, your facial expression, understanding when, I'm being a little bit sarcastic, or when I'm, a smart remark to somebody, or witty remark to somebody, or, something that is, uplifting in a certain way, or you've got a relationship and there's a word or a phrase that means something to one player, and you can say that on the fly, and he's like, yeah, okay, coach, I got you, sort of thing. And those bits, and can that work in a foreign culture and foreign language? And it's been an interesting journey, and I've really enjoyed my time. I think it's taken some time, and as with everything, it's giving and taking and molding and all those sorts of things. And by the end of the year, I feel like we were slowly starting to get there, and I look forward to this next season, because we're returning most of the guys to see how that continues to grow.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of things, a lot of nuances get lost in translation, and that's I think the biggest challenge when you go to a foreign speaking country with a different culture, with a different expression. And that's not lots of things get lost, and like you said, that's probably the toughest part when you implement that. But just before we move on to the fourth quarter, because we're already on a running here a little bit towards overtime. One last question I wanted to ask in terms of communication was with the staff, with the coaching staff, what your expectations are with the coaching staff, how you what topics you mostly talk to them about besides cultural things, because you also, a lot of times the discussions I had was also, how does this player feel? What was this expression about? What's the relationship between this player and that player? Which players like to play with each other? Those are, I think, more you can chalk that up to culture. But in terms of X's and O's, what are some things you talk to your staff about, and what's your expectation from your staff, whether it's practice or games?
Yeah, so common discussions are sure the same with every staff is, how the hell are we going to go at the pick and roll? What are we going to do with that?
That's international for sure.
Yeah, sure. So that forms it. I think also often discussions around who needs to play with who, potential lineups that they might go with. So, do we need to be ready for any particular, do we need to go with different lineups at different times based on who they're playing? Certainly in the game situations, who do we trust at the end of a game? Who needs to be in? Importantly, who's inbounding the ball? I think something that's often overlooked. Everyone's worrying about who's going to shoot, but who's going to inbound the basketball in a pressure situation? So those sorts of discussions, certainly you've got me off you already covered off the team chemistry stuff, and are there certain groups that play better together, and who do we need to play with who? Going into a game, in this game, are there somebody from the opposition we want to pick on? Any sort of, any two people we want to put in the pick and roll situations? Where are our advantages? Are we better running? Are we better slowing it down? Certainly from my perspective, and you no doubt would have felt this with the Lithuanian teams, how do we disrupt defensively? And so when you talk about expectations of my assistants, yep, go ahead. It looks like
luckily you had Delhi to be the biggest disruptor in on earth.
Yeah, absolutely, we did. But again, in terms of with the group buying, buying in, I guess if you want to say it to the system, and they understood, if we let Lithuania come down and run horns, that ain't going to happen for us. So, Delhi leads it, but then we had people hitting at half court and running and jumping and getting it out of Kalnides' hands. And okay, let's put them into a bit of a scramble team. Let's see if you spoke before about, and often European teams like their systems, and they feel very comfortable in their systems, and they're very good. They're freedom within the system, as you said, no problems, but they like to get to, we start here and we do this. And so, okay, we're not going to let you do that. Let's see how you play just freelance and go, and are you prepared to? And yes, I think I've found, certainly with European teams, yes, for periods of time, but ultimately they want to come back to what they feel comfortable with. Every team does, right? And particularly if the game keeps tight or gets tight, or you miss a couple of shots, and then it's like, no, we need to be able to run horns. We're good at horns. It's like, no, we're not going to let you run horns. Do something else. We don't care. Just don't run horns. So I think that's a good always kind of fight that you have with the European teams.
Sounds like you had quite a bit of a nightmares about horns.
Yeah, every night. Couldn't sleep for a week. Yeah, so certainly in terms of expectations of my assistants, I mean, the first one and the most critical one is I got to trust you. You know, that's it.
As a person. Yeah,
as a person, that starts and stops there. And I've always said to them, and just like we build with the team, we also try to do things as a staff as to who do we want to be as a coaching staff, and what do we want, and what are our values, and what do we expect from each other. So we spend time on that. And the thing that always comes out there is like, I want you guys to have the opinions. I want you to, I don't want yes men. I want to have good discussions about stuff and bring your ideas. But we have those in here as a coaching staff, and we debate as much as we want and no problems. But when we leave the room, we're united. Like, this is where we're on a united front here, and the one thing that gets you fired with me is if I hear from somewhere around the trap that you've been bagging one of our players, you've been bagging me, you've been bagging our system, you don't know why we do something. If I hear that from someone outside, you're gone. Come and tell me. If you don't like something we're doing, tell me. No problems. Like, good. Let's have that discussion. Oh, good. So trust is the biggest one. You got to make, because and particularly, the higher you go, the more it's, everyone's got a little political agenda, and there's a board member standing next to somebody when things are going bad and all that sort of stuff. And you got to know that your assistants, no matter what, in every situation, we got your back. So that's the first one. And then I want them to coach. I want them to go ahead. I'd give them lots of responsibilities of practice, coach teams, take drills in games. I want them to come with their ideas and opinions. And of course, over time, you build a chemistry and a rhythm, and people start to find their niche and their spots, and what, and they know what you are as a coach and what you like and what you don't like. And again, hopefully you build that environment where you can give and receive feedback without people taking offense. In games is I hate calling it high pressure, but it's like it's quick decision making environment, and people come with ideas and they can't get offended if you say no. But
yep.
I want you to come with the next idea, Bennis. Just because I shut that one down, I don't want you to sit down and sulk. Come with if you believe in something, come up and tell me. And that is also another interesting balance. I've had that discussion with assistant coaches sometimes is, but if you come with something, come with it because you actually believe it's better for us, not just to get in a discussion for the sake of this, to be seen to be doing something. Like if you really believe our pick and roll defense should change, come and tell me you think our pick and deep we should try something different. But don't just come and suggest something else just for the sake of it.
I've fallen prey to that one time in the meeting early on when the first year I worked with Messina in Moscow, and was where we had a meeting, we had a discussion, and I just like, we should guard the pick and roll this way instead of that way. And he said, why do you think that? And I just had no answer for why. I just thought we should change it up. But if you have to change it up, you have to also give a good reason why you're changing it up. Yeah. And just like, that was the first like aha moment. Like I ate shit for a day, and I got some good advice there that day. But you learn from that, and then you learn to justify. You grow as a coach, you grow as a staff, because you're able to express yourself. There's a lot of freedom, like you said. Like, it's good to have freedom on the staff and to give your coaches a platform to express themselves, whether it's to the players in front of the video session or in the staff, and let them. They have to have an opinion. You cannot have just like you said, followers. And there's a story that came up before we move on to the fourth quarter. There was a story that I remember from an Outliers book. I believe it was Outliers, where it's talking about Korean Air having lots of airplane crash in the 70s or 60s, I believe. And there was just this weird correlation just with Korean Air. And they hired a outside cultural expert, or not expert, but somebody from the outside culture, to see what's going on within their cockpit. And they realized that there was just too rigid of a system of co-pilots not being able to express their opinion, because the hierarchy was so rigid and so hard that they saw the mistake made, but they couldn't express themselves because they were afraid of being fired, of being put aside, and then the airplanes crash, which is tragic. So I think it's very important to express that. One quick question from self-improvement, because I see that we also have to go to the ATOs, and I hope, are we still good on time? I know I'm overgoing.
All good.
Okay.
Yep, all good.
So luckily we started a little bit earlier. The one from self-improvement, is there something that you've done 12 years ago, or specifically during the winning periods with New Zealand Breakers when you were coaching, that you, despite the winning, don't do today anymore, whether it's in practice or whether it's some habit that you had, something that you used to do on a daily basis, or within practices that you just bagged it because of new lessons that you've learned along the way?
That's a very interesting question, and not one that I've really considered before.
Welcome to my podcast.
And as I sit here now, I don't have a specific thing to answer to that, other than like it's a continual growth journey. Like life is a continual growth journey, and coaching is certainly a continual growth journey. And do I coach differently now than I did 12 years ago? Yes, of course. You have to grow, otherwise, you're not going to survive. In specific areas, it's hard to sort of say that. Again, you grow and evolve, and one of the things that I have done a lot in recent years that I've really taken interest in is how the mind works, and I read a few books on that, and there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I'd recommend anybody to spend some time perusing that book. And so just again, how you can help people and influence people just by the way you choose to sort of frame things and say things. And I guess perhaps continue to grow more down the positive space than, if you talk about differences from me from 12 years ago, it's like the positivity in my communication versus a negativity. And it's like, something I always tell my wife is, tell me what you do want, not what you don't want. So it's a little bit to the players, and I say that to the assistants. And I think any new assistant, any assistant coach who comes with me for the first time will hear that somewhere in the first sort of month with me. It's like, whatever, from me or the players, tell them what you want them to do. Stop telling them what you don't want them to do, and so I think I'm certainly far more down that path now than I was 12 years ago, where I used to always pick on the negatives. Now I think I focus more on either the positives, or this is where what we want, this is where we're trying to get to, this is what let's do it this way.
Love it. I love that. I'm generally like enforce and like positivity, because I feel like just two minuses don't always make a plus. Like you can, mathematically it's true, but on the court or in human behavior, it's not always true. I think that makes it difficult to really maximize the team's potential. So I'm always for positivity instead of negativity. You ready for my ATO?
I was going to say, so I said before about the poor play that I ran in Japan, at the end of a game. So it's one thing to say, yeah, I ran a poor play, and it's like, but what would I run? So in your own mind, you're doing that, and it's same for the players. Like, okay, so we didn't like this, but this is the answer. This is the solution. This is the way out. This is the way to make it, what we do want, sort of situation. So, yeah, for me, that's the positivity side of it. And like I said before, it's the continual question for me is, as I keep getting older, and the players keep staying the young age, how do I continue to be able to influence and have them trust me? And, just now with the whole thing on social media and communication, the way you communicate, I guess that's something certainly I've had to learn over the last few years. And as much as perhaps I don't like it personally, I have implemented more communication via texting and WhatsApp and those sorts of things to a player individually. I've always been an individual communicator. I want to go and sit with a player and take him for a coffee and all that. And I still try to do that. But now, I have given in and said, yeah, actually, to be able to communicate with them, I need to go to a platform they're familiar with or comfortable with. And so, I've given into that for sure. And the other one is the embracing of analytics, and whether, that's a whole other podcast. I'm sure you've done plenty on that. But how much do you take on board, and how much is feel, and whether those two things meet. So certainly growth in that space.
Totally. All those topics I think about constantly. There's the yin and the yang, and you have to balance it out, and you have to find yourself within the two somewhere. You ready for my ATOs?
Okay, not really, but here we go. Don't draw a bad play.
I'm gonna have to try to draw up the right play here, and you're gonna have to execute. So you already mentioned that a little bit, but this is just a quick maybe why did you not have social media up until now? Like, again, I saw you have LinkedIn, but I didn't see you on Instagram or Twitter. Is there a particular reason why you try to not to be on there?
Yeah, I found in my career that I do get impacted by negative comments and things like that, and white noise. And once I read something, I find it hard to unread it. And so I find it just better not to put myself in that situation where I could get hit with any sort of white noise. So I stay away from it. Certainly in my club, there are people that monitor or keep track of, what's going on with player accounts and all that. And if there's something that, they think I need to be across, they'll let me know, but I stay right away from it. And I'm way happier. As you get older, that's one of the things, your own happiness starts to weigh into things a little bit more too,
We talked a little bit about accountability and ownership. Is there such thing as taking too much ownership for your own actions?
Wow, interesting question. No, like the answer is no. Like, I don't think you can take too much ownership, but you can let it beat you up too much. Like, you can let it change what happens next. The ability to move on to the next part or the next play, and you can continue to let a poor choice or bad decision then impact what happens next, as opposed to being able to move on to now making a better decision or a better outcome for what's about to happen.
I've got two quick questions from listeners. One was about the Breakers seasons. At the end of your Breakers career, was there a point where you felt like you had to leave, and without knowing the backstory of how it ended, but did you feel like you had to leave in order to grow? Or was there just a point come where it just went to a different direction from when you had to leave New Zealand?
So the national team job came up, and at that point, the Australian national team wanted a full-time, the Federation wanted a full-time national coach. They hadn't had one since 2000. That was the last time they'd had, any sort of success, again, where they'd finished fourth at an Olympic Games. And so they were going back down that path. And so in order to coach a national team, I needed to commit to being a full-time national coach. And it was a really difficult decision to leave New Zealand. Like, that was, such a critical part of my career, and such wonderful people. And the owner there is one of the most beautiful people you would ever meet, and invested a lot of time in me. And so that was a heartbreaking thing to do, but it was a chance to coach my national team. And ultimately that was the decision I took.
Fourth place behind Lithuania, I might add.
Yes, that's right, at the Sydney Olympics. Indeed, heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Lithuania.
You got your fair share of victories too. Another one from a listener: the youth system in Australia, which personally I really adore, where everything is centered throughout the AIS and it's filtered through. Do you feel like if you feel like anything could be improved, what would it be within that system?
So, I mean, as you say, I think it's a very good system. And I think we're starting to see sort of the results of it now. We've got lots of players being drafted. Dyson Daniels drafted number 8 the other day. Like, we're getting a constant flow of Australians into the NBA now, more than we ever had. And that's a result of the development system for sure. The one thing so part of being the full-time national coach was overseeing the development system on the men's side of it, and providing leadership and some direction on that side of it. So for me, the thing that could improve is just the relationship and I guess ultimate buy-in from the states into doing what is best for the national program. And it's human nature, right? Is so at the state level and then down at the club level, it's I want to win now. This is my kid. I don't want to let him go up to the next level of for him to be taken away because now my team's not going to win. I want to play the 5'2" point guard because he's better than the 6'2" point guard who can't quite dribble right now. But for the good of the national program, you should play the 6'2" guy because he's the one who's going to be there, come in another 5 years' time. Like just that coordination and buy-in to the overall, I guess, national program is the one thing, just making that a bit more, the synergy of that better. But I mean, the national program has a big part to play in that because at the moment, the rewards aren't there from the national program for those who do the work at the junior levels. You don't get rewarded for having players come up and play in the national program and those sorts of things. So the rewards are all based on how you're going now, and winning now.
But that's a similarity in Lithuanian system as well. There's the need and the urge to win by the coaches. But in hindsight, there's also a reward for the coaches if their player comes up the system and plays for the national team at some point. It's a small reward, but it's still a reward, and there's some sort of incentive to bring the player up. But the coach also wants to win, so that's also like too much tactics, too much scouting at a young age, and it kind of deters the player from developing openly to basketball and not to a rigid system that the coach wants to see. Last question, quick hitter at the end. You mentioned the book already that I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned Thinking Fast and Slow. But last, and this is my Tim Ferriss question that I ask almost every time when I talk to a guest. What's your favorite failure throughout your career that you learned the most from, and it stinks and it also brings a smile to your face at the same time?
Favorite failure. There's probably so many of them.
The one that has joy attached to it.
Yeah. So I've referred to that first year where first year being the head coach. I was actually at New Zealand. We're a bad team, and I was trying to be somebody I'm not. And through that period, like there's a player that Mika Vakona, who's had a wonderful international career for New Zealand. And at that stage, he was just a young player for me. I brought him in, and over the next couple of years, he started playing for us. And Mika, as you know, plays with an amazing energy and
toughness.
Toughness is what he brings. And particularly when he was young, like he would make like some just crazy mistakes, right? Like he would, dribble down the floor and throw the ball in the fifth row. And I focused on that with Mika all the time. Like I was always yelling at him about the mistakes that he was making and getting on him about, settling down. And I didn't sort of perhaps perceive all the good things that he did, and like with every player, they give and they take, as long as you give more than you take, it's a pretty good equation. But I didn't see the giving part with Mika. And so I was constantly on him, and I didn't build a relationship. At that stage, we weren't doing this cultural stuff. And then his contract came up, and I, was desperate to re-sign him, and he chose to go to a different team. And when I asked him, like, it was like, I'm disappointed, Mika, what happened? He's like, I don't feel like you trust me. And that for me was a real, smack in the mouth moment of here's a guy, I've brought him in as a young guy. He's a good player. I'm trying to keep him, and he leaves because he doesn't feel that I trust him. Like, wow, like this was hurtful. And that started me down some of this other path. And, as the story goes, Mika comes back to New Zealand. We go win 3 championships together, and now we have a wonderful relationship. And when Mika came back, actually, that's the other part of the story. So Mika got to a point where he was playing. If he made a mistake, he'd always look over at me, and I'd be like, God, Mika, And then after he came back, and I'd grown a little bit as a coach, and he had hurt me so much by that one comment that stuck with me. When he came back, he'd be doing the stuff, he'd dive on the floor, loose ball, rebound and all that, and I'd be up and smiling. And then he'd come down, he'd throw the ball, he'd still throw the ball in the fifth row sometimes. And that happened, and I'd see him start to look at me, and I'd pretend like I'd look down at the bench like I was talking to an assistant coach. I'd be looking up in the stands, I'd just have a big smile on my face or something, and so from, I started to realize that you did so many good things that you had to accept some of the mistakes with it. But the bigger thing was the trust. He knew that I trusted him and I believed in him. So that's probably, as I reflect on it now, a significant moment in my career.
Yeah. Was that specific to him, or was it specific to New Zealand culture, you think? The trust.
I think specific to him, because he's just a player, not just from New Zealand culture. Again, every player has their own emotions and confidence, and the way they interact with you, and again, expressions on the face and all that sort of stuff. And as I reflected on it after he said that he felt I didn't trust him, when I reflected on myself, it's like I could understand why. Because so much, again, his facial expression and this, and when he's doing something and grabbing your hair and like, what are you doing? Like, all that sort of stuff. I could understand that. Then he would start to play anxiously. Yeah. And I think any player does,
tighten up.
Yeah. If players are playing scared to make a mistake, that's a tough place to play. It's a tough place for anybody to play, I think, and to succeed.
Well, thank you for trusting me for this podcast. It's
been a while. Finally, we got here.
Yes. I've taken you through the ringer here for almost an hour and a half, and I apologize for taking it too long. But I really, really enjoyed this podcast. I can honestly say this was my favorite and most fluent. Like your offense had the most flow to it, and I think we did a lot of good counters also when I did a side turn, and I appreciate your patience with it.
Of course, Ben. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it, and hopefully your listeners get something out of it.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening to it, and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks.